Welcome everyone, and I just want to start with why we're here. So the region's currently updating its official plan to bring it into conformity with recent provincial legislation. So in the province of Ontario, the province provides high-level policy documents that set the ground rules for land use planning that municipalities have to conform to. So as part of this work, there's a new provincial requirement to map employment areas in the York Region's official plan, work that has previously only been done at the local municipal level. Regional staff are also undertaking a comprehensive process assessing employment land conversion requests that propose to convert employment lands to other land uses such as residential. The results of staff's work to date include proposed draft mapping of employment areas to be included in the regional official plan, as well as staff's recommendations for the conversion requests. So this work was presented back to regional council back in March of this year. And at that March session, council directed staff to consult with the public on the proposed mapping and employment land conversion requests assessment. Just moving on to, so today's webinar does provide you with an opportunity to ask questions, as Lauren mentioned, to learn more and provide input about our process. You also, as Lauren mentioned, have the opportunity to visit York.ca, have your say. It's our online platform that's open until the end of this week. So through the presentation, I will provide some background and context information on the region's role in planning for employment, on what employment areas are and their importance to the region's economy. I'll also describe what an employment area conversion is, walk through the components of the comprehensive assessment for conversion requests staff have undertaken that led to our recommendations. I then discuss the process for identifying employment area boundaries at a regional scale. I'll end with staff recommendations on the conversion requests as well as the proposed mapping, and then close with next steps as part of our planning for employment process. So this slide, for those of you that don't know what an official plan is, the regional official plan is a public document that includes policies that express the region's vision. It allows the public to understand how our land may be used now and in the future, and the region will be home to an additional 600,000 people and 250,000 jobs by 2041. So the regional official plan describes how the region plans to accommodate all of this growth while at the same time meeting the needs of existing residents and businesses in the region. So the process by which the region updates its official plan is known as a municipal comprehensive review. So planning for employment is one of the many background and technical components of the municipal comprehensive review, as shown by the graphic that's intended to show how these reports will inform the updated official plan. You can see on the graph beside employment planning, there are a number of other topics covering housing, climate change, natural heritage, and agricultural systems, and so forth. So to date, staff have brought forward to Regional Council a series of reports on the topic of employment planning in the order of 6. And the last one was in March, and that report provided Council with recommended employment area boundaries and conversions, as already mentioned. And we are now, of course, consulting on this material. So the next slide, this is mentioned up front. There's new legislation was recently introduced by the province through a planning document known as the Growth Plan. This requires the region to identify and map and establish a policy framework for employment areas in its official plan, as well as to assess and make decisions on requests to convert employment lands to other uses, including residential. So up to this point, the mapping and designation of permitted uses and decisions on requests to convert employment lands were all made by local municipalities and local councils. So local municipalities are therefore key stakeholders in our process, and their employment boundaries, their policy frameworks, and their site-specific knowledge of conversion requests were a very important part of our overall process. So a bit of background on employment in the region, which will help set the stage for the role that employment areas play in delivering and attracting jobs. I mentioned that the region is forecast to add another 250,000 jobs to 2041. Employment lands are very important in reaching this forecast, as they have traditionally accommodated over 50% of jobs across the region. York has a very diversified economy with employment available across a whole range of sectors, as you can see on the slide, ranging from manufacturing, wholesale trade to professional, scientific, and financial services. There are, in fact, over 50,000 businesses in York Region, and some of the largest and most successful global research and development companies are headquartered here, where they have major operations in the region. So employment areas that contribute to the diversity of the regional economy by providing strategic sites that are attractive to businesses, particularly those that have locational requirements that don't allow them to locate elsewhere in the region for reasons such as noise or odor. And some businesses also require access to highways, to rail, and to airports for their operations. So we do have a poll question, and that's just coming up on the screen. And of the following sectors, which do you feel are the least compatible with residential? You have a choice of 3 on the screen. Okay, I believe, okay, we've got a pretty good, still some votes coming in. Okay, we've got 24 responses and 88% pick manufacturing, and 8% professional and scientific services, 4% wholesale. So thank you for those results. So moving on to the next slide. Just to delve into what are employment areas. They're clusters of sites within the region, and they're shown in purple on the slide, and they're only reserved for businesses and economic activities ranging from industrial uses to office parks. Residential uses are not permitted in these areas, and the total inventory of the region's employment lands equates to over 7,800 hectares, of which 33% or 2,600 are in fact vacant. The region's employment areas are diverse in nature with a variety of economic characteristics, and each local municipality plays an important and distinct role in providing employment. There are 3 large-scale employment nodes in the region, as seen on the screen, that contribute to a significant number of jobs, as well as contributing to the region's gross domestic product, or GDP. There's the office high-tech area in Markham Richmond Hill, around the 404 and 400. Manufacturing, logistics, transportation, warehousing area in Central and West Vaughan, and the emerging employment area in Aurora, Newmarket, East Gwillimbury, and Keswick, along the 404 highway running towards the North and York region. So each of these areas are the center of economic zones that provide better live-work opportunities for residents and workers. Each have different employment sectors, different densities, built form and markets, and each node is essential to the region, and it's important that an adequate supply is available in all 3 of these employment nodes that provide flexibility for businesses that may want to locate here. So we do have a second poll question that relates to this information. What percentage of York Region's 400 series highway frontage is currently protected from development by provincial policies such as the Oak Ridges Moraine Plan and the Greenbelt Plan? This is given an option of 3, 25%, 33%, or 50%. Okay, we've got another very good response, 56% indicating it's 33% of the region is covered by 400 series highway frontage, and that in fact is the correct answer. So we've got some well-informed participants today. Well done for that. So moving on to the next slide, I'm going to be covering, just in terms of summarizing what I've been referring to the last few slides. Employment areas are of significant importance to the regional economy, and they will be important for years to come in supporting and growing both the region and the local municipal economies. So it's important to protect these areas because there is a finite supply of them in the region. They provide sites at lower land values for business growth than elsewhere in the region. And many businesses also have specific location requirements depending on the type of business operation. For example, heavy industrial users may need to be separated from residential and other sensitive uses due to noise or odors, and businesses involved in wholesale, warehousing, distribution functions, or those involved in goods movement or who export their products may require access to highways, rails, and airports. So the next slide is moving on to the topic of employment area conversions. Just waiting for that slide to come up. Employment conversions occur when a property owner wishes to change the use on an employment area site to allow for a use that was previously prohibited. And the most common proposed use is in fact residential. So a conversion request, if approved, results in the land being redesignated to allow for the proposed use, and the land is then also removed from the region's employment land inventory. And there are many reasons why these conversion requests occur, but in general, they result from a site offering the potential for a greater or more immediate return on investment if it's developed for a non-employment use. So a very important part of staff's work over the past year or so has been to assess whether conversion requests should be supported or not be supported as regional council decides where future jobs will be delivered across the region. So this process needs to be done carefully, as there are many instances where, in staff's opinion, it's in the public interest that a conversion request may not be appropriate, particularly in instances where a conversion request might impact the region's ability to meet its forecast, or the request might impact the overall viability of an employment area. Conversely, staff may be supporting the request, particularly if the proposed uses will integrate well with the surrounding context, for example, around transit stations along a rapid transit corridor in the region. So on the next slide, it details the number of conversion requests that we have received in the region, and it's a total of 70 active requests, and you can see on the slide the distribution amongst the 9 local municipalities. The majority of requests are in the southern 3 of Markham, Vaughan, and Richmond Hill, with 41% of the total, in fact, being in the city of Vaughan. The 70 requests represent roughly 700 net hectares. That equates to almost 2 full concession blocks. A concession block is roughly 2 square kilometers. So the next slide highlights the process that staff have undertaken to look at not only the 70 employment conversion requests, but also to assess the current employment area boundaries and also considering potential boundary refinements based on both local and regional objectives. So our process is, as I mentioned, is shown on the slide, and we'll get into more detail in the following slides, but an important takeaway is that the process involved extensive consultation with local municipalities as well as property owners and the industry. So in assessing the 70 site-specific conversion requests, Staff used a set of criteria that Regional Council adopted in March 2019. And these employment land conversion criteria were based on the 5 key theme areas that are listed on the slide before you. And considering the viability of an employment area, this included criteria that focused on the impact to existing and future business operations in the area. Access criteria ensured that staff took a close look at how a conversion would impact goods movement corridors and business traffic. In addition to transportation infrastructure, there were also criteria that considered demands a conversion request may put on both water and wastewater infrastructure. And criteria were also included that considered whether the conversion request would impact region-wide interests or negatively impact the region's overall employment area supply. So following the site-specific conversion request assessments that staff undertook, both regional and local staff took a look at all of our existing employment areas with these additional considerations in mind, that those listed on this slide, as part of a broader analysis where we put emphasis on local municipal context and objectives, aligning as much as possible with our local municipal partners. So in collaboration with local municipal staff, core employment areas that staff considered not appropriate for conversion were identified. And these are areas that staff feels should be designated and protected through the regional official plan as well as local official plans. Staff undertook an analysis as well on current and future trends. So employment trends considered the changing nature of how jobs are being delivered, the potential impact of automation, and the growing role of e-commerce, among other things. So we recognize that the economy is in a period of transition. The employment trends work indicates that the demand for employment land is expected to remain strong. So while minor refinements to existing boundaries are appropriate, the majority of the region's employment areas should be protected for future economic development opportunities. It's important to emphasize that staff's work to date has taken a balanced approach in developing both the proposed regional employment area boundaries and staff's recommendations on the 70 conversion requests. The extent of the requests, as I mentioned, represents roughly 700 hectares, or almost 2 full concession blocks. In fact, that's a magnitude which could have a profound impact on the region's ability to meet its employment forecast. And if you recall earlier, I mentioned that the region's supply of strategically located employment areas is finite. Regional staff are supporting a number of the conversion requests that we feel provide opportunities to support a broad range of uses beyond purely employment uses, while continuing to protect the region's economic opportunities with respect to existing and future businesses, while continuing to protect convenient access for goods movement, and while continuing to minimize the conflict between businesses and potential neighbors, as well as not introducing residents into areas that do not offer access to other community amenities such as parks and schools. So we do have, I believe, the third poll question from this presentation. Which attribute of an employment area is most important to you? Proximity to highway or rail, protected from incompatible land uses, for example, residential, or on a transit line. So we've got just over 50% of response from participants, and it looks like it's fairly even in terms of the distribution, with 38% proximity to a highway or rail is most important, followed by on transit, and then protected from incompatible land uses. Once again, thank you for that input. So moving on to the actual staff recommendations on the conversion requests. Our process resulted in staff recommending support for 20 of the 70 requests, and these are shown on the slide. That 20 is in fact 29% overall. As a reminder, these are staff recommendations, and Regional Council will ultimately make the final decisions on each request later on this year. So I'm going to walk through a number of examples to give you a better understanding of the employment land conversion requests staff are recommending to Regional Council to support or not to support. Also listed on this slide are the proposed mapping of boundaries that staff are currently proposing to be included in the regional official plan. So on a general level, staff are recommending support for requests that are located in employment areas where the local context within or surrounding the employment area has changed over time, making these sites more appropriate for a mix of residential and employment uses. For example, they may now be connected to higher order transit, or they may be isolated from other employment uses, or in fact, they may be removed from 400 series highways. So the first three examples on the slide is one showing the Mulock Bayview site in Newmarket. That's a site adjacent to the proposed Mulock GO station in Newmarket. There's also an example from the Magna employment area in the town of Aurora. And then the third example is a site in Richmond Hills, Newkirk employment area adjacent to Yonge Street. So these three examples of sites are examples that staff are supporting because of their location and their context in the region's urban structure. These sites are all removed from 400 series highways, and in each case, the nature of employment in these areas has changed over time. And supporting the conversion also provides local municipal staff with flexibility to advance broader local municipal planning objectives. So the Newmarket site on the top of these three has been identified, as I mentioned, as a potential GO station and major transit station area, and is likely to benefit from increased flexibility for a broader range of uses with a mixed use or other non-employment designation where appropriate. The Aurora site is part of the existing Magna campus. It's largely vacant, surrounded by residential uses, so it's compatible with the proposed non-employment uses. Similarly, in Richmond Hill, this particular site is adjacent to Yonge Street, a regional corridor served by rapid transit. So in terms of sites that staff generally are not recommending for conversion, these requests are within employment area nodes that are strategically located along goods movement corridors, such as 400 series highways and major rail infrastructure, such as the CN McMillan Rail Yard. You can see on the sample, this sample at the bottom. Protecting employment areas adjacent to highway and rail infrastructure is essential. And the node adjacent to the CN McMillan Rail Yard is one of the most successful and diverse employment nodes in the region. And the other site shown on the slide at the top right is adjacent to the 400 and 407 node, an area that I mentioned earlier contains an important high-tech cluster in the region. So staff do, however, want to stress while support has not been recommended for 50 of the 70 requests, there are a further 18 requests in the region that are located in areas that offer potential for increased flexibility in terms of employment uses. So while staff don't recommend residential in these areas, these are sites that could be explored further with local municipal staff for a broader range of employment uses because of their proximity to regional cores and higher order transit. So the example shown on the slide is that same area near the McMillan Yard, and isolates those sites along Highway 7 and adjacent to the regional center known as the Vaughan Metropolitan Center. And you can see they're identified in, I believe that's a yellowish green on the slide. So now just a summary of our next steps. Over the summer, we will take feedback from this Public Information Center, and we'll continue to work with local municipal staff on refinements to the employment area boundaries, as well as any potential changes in staff's position on the conversions. So as of today, we now have council positions from all 9 local municipalities. So those will also be considered prior to developing final recommendations. And in the fall, regional staff will then be seeking regional council endorsement of our revised mapping, including the staff recommendations on the 70 conversion requests. So this report later in the year will summarize what was heard during this Public Information Center, how it was addressed, and will also provide a preliminary employment policy framework. Finally, all of this work will be input into the draft official plan that's scheduled for the first part of next year. So that concludes our content for today. And we now want to hear from you, taking a closer look at employment area mapping or requests for conversion in your community. And you can let us know, are you supportive of staff's recommendations generally on our mapping with respect to the conversion sites? And if you could tell us why or why not, that would certainly be very helpful. Should any further changes be made to the boundaries is another question. And if you have any other thoughts on employment planning and job delivery in general that we could use in generating policies for these areas as we update the regional official plan, that would also be very beneficial to staff and regional council. So tell us your thoughts on these topics and more using our interactive map at York.ca, Have Your Say, if you haven't already. As I mentioned, the online site is open until the end of this week. So before we conclude, I do have one final poll question. It's coming up on the screen. How likely are you to visit York.ca/haveyoursay following this webinar to provide comments? Definitely likely, very likely, somewhat likely, and not very likely. Okay, that's a great. So it looks certainly the majority, the vast majority are either somewhat likely, very likely, or definitely likely. So that's encouraging for staff at the region. So we'll now answer some of your questions. Please don't hesitate to ask more. You can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And we have myself and Sandra available to answer questions, as well as some regional staff.